We know the earth is old from lots and lots of evidence, yet Genesis 1 seems to describe a very young earth created in 6 days. One way to reconcile these two things is to read Genesis 1 as describing, in a literal sense, the creation of life on the earth over millions of years. A day could be taken to mean a very long period of time, and so forth. Many thoughtful Christians take this approach, but I think that it falls short. In this video, I'll explain the strengths and weaknesses of Old Earth Creationism. Hey there, I'm John and welcome to my channel. We discuss interesting and challenging aspects of Christianity and Scripture here, like different perspectives on early Genesis. So, I sympathize. One way to show that the Bible is not in conflict with science is to read Genesis 1 as literally describing an old earth. This is called Old Earth Creationism. And it's tempting. And I've met many Christians that have taken this approach. They may think they need to in order to avoid a contradiction in the text. I believe that the solution lies, instead, in reading Genesis 1 in light of the ancient Near Eastern literature, as being similar in form to the creation accounts of the surrounding cultures, but being imbued with truth. I don't think Genesis 1 is best read literally and historically, and I think it is a mistake to read modern-day science into the Bible, as Old Earth creationists seem to do. But let's suppose, for the sake of argument, that Genesis 1 should be read literally. Even in that case, does the Old Earth creationist model work? I don't think so, but let's take a look. Maybe you'll come to a different conclusion. So the first key to the OEC position is to deal with the word day. There is room to argue that it does not mean a 24-hour day. Ancient Hebrew had a very small vocabulary, perhaps as small as 3,000 words. As a result, many words have multiple meanings. In Genesis 1, the word from which we get day is yom, and I apologize in advance for butchering any Hebrew here. But throughout the Bible, yom often means a strict 24-hour day, but has other meanings as well. Importantly, one of those other meanings is a long, indeterminate period of time. And there are many instances in the Old Testament where yom refers to an indefinite period of time. However, the examples generally used of yom referring to an extended period of time are examples in which the word is being used idiomatically, as in that day. Also, when the Hebrew word yom appears in the Old Testament with a number, as it does in Genesis 1, it refers to a 24-hour day. Further, we have the phrase, and there was evening and there was morning, for the 6 creation days. Well, this could signify that each day of long, indeterminate length had an end, but to me, it is another weight in favor of the days referring to 24 hours. So the days of Genesis 1 could refer to a very long period of time, to very long periods of time, but it seems unlikely. So now let's walk through the chapter, critiquing the OEC model along the way. Verse 1 states, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Plausibly, this corresponds well with the period of time starting with the instantaneous initial creation of the universe and continuing through the formation of the earth. David Snoke sets the Big Bang at the very first line of Genesis. And John Lennox sees things similarly, commenting that the standard Big Bang model developed by physicists and cosmologists can be seen as a scientific unpacking of the implications of the statement, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Note also that the heavens are mentioned first, which fits the scientific timeline. In this rendering, the initial creation of the universe and the earth occurred prior to, or at the beginning of, day 1. A good case is made by Rich Dean, who writes, "When we look at Genesis 1 verse 2, we see that it begins with the conjunction and. This fact immediately tells us that Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 are part of one continuous thought. Remove the period at the end of Genesis 1:1 and read it as originally intended. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was formless and void." The conjunction at the beginning of Genesis 1:2 tells us that Genesis 1:1 is not a summary of the creation account. This verse is a factual statement of what God did at the beginning of the first day. A majority of scholars do, however, view Genesis 1:1 as being an introduction to the rest of the chapter rather than a first act of creation. I'll have more to say on this in a future video, But for now, I'll just point out the symmetry between the beginning of the creation account, Genesis 1:1, and the end, Genesis 2, verses 1 to 3. In Genesis 1, verse 1, the order is God created and then heavens and earth. In Genesis 2, verses 1 to 3, the order is reversed. Heavens and earth is mentioned first, then finished, and then God. This artful arrangement suggests that Genesis 1, verse 1 and chapter 2, verse 1 to 3 are bookends of the creation account, with Genesis 1:1 being the introduction. Now, another way to read Genesis 1, verse 1 is as the beginning of a long sentence that ends in verse 3. In this case, verse 1 is setting the stage for the rest of the story of the first chapter of Genesis. Again, I plan to have more to say on verse 1 in a future video. Now, verse 2 reads, "The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters." This could correspond with the state of the earth relatively early in its existence. Long ago, the atmosphere was very dense, such that it may have been quite dark. There is evidence the globe may have been completely covered by water, as plate tectonics and volcanic activity had not yet pushed the continents up above sea level, and there was less water within the crust of the earth, and thus more above. And the first life forms had yet to appear. As Hugh comments, observational data, including the study of the Earth's oldest rocks and theoretical modeling of planetary formation, together verify the historical accuracy of early Earth's conditions described in Genesis 1, verse 2. Water did indeed initially cover all of the Earth's crust. Now, "let there be light" in verse 3 could refer to the point where the atmosphere thinned out enough such that the sun's light penetrated down to the surface of the Earth. This would have produced, from the perspective of an observer on the surface of the Earth, a day-night light cycle, such that the light and darkness were separated. Again, I think this is a plausible interpretation, but I don't think it really fits the text. The text is quite dramatic and seems to imply an instantaneous event rather than a gradual process. In the OEC telling, however, it would have been such a gradual process that the first light would have been barely perceptible, like the first faintest hints of dawn before the sun peaks up above the horizon. And where is the light coming from? Perhaps a temporary light source, but the literal reading of the text is silent on this. Or the sun could have been created as part of the heavens in verse 1, but the text does not give supporting evidence of this, and this assumes a particular interpretation of verse 1. Now, the separation of the waters on day 2 could be the creation of a water cycle, with clouds dropping rain, which then evaporate and returns to the clouds. This would be the OEC interpretation. However, the Hebrew word translated expanse in the English Standard Version is rakia. Many translations render the word as something firm and solid. The NIV renders it vault. The New King James Version has firmament. And the NRSV has dome. The ESV itself mentions in the margin vault as an alternative translation. Now, scholars are divided to an extent. While I've come across multiple scholars who think it should be translated sky or something similar, the majority of researchers seem to hold that rakia refers to something like a dome, a solid barrier that holds up water above it. For example, Denis Lamoureux writes that Scripture states that God created the firmament to separate the heavenly sea from the earthly sea on day 2, and then he placed the sun, moon, and stars in the firmament on day 4. Also, Conrad Hires explains that firmament referred literally to a solid metallic band believed to stretch across the sky like a cosmic version of a domed stadium. This, of course, does not comport with modern science, but it does comport with the scientific understanding of the day when Genesis was written. As we'll see in a future video, people at that time believed that there were vast reservoirs of water below the earth based on their observation of springs and rivers. Likewise, they believed that there were waters, literally a sea of water, above the earth. It makes sense, given those assumptions, that there would have to be something firm holding up the waters above. So here again, the OEC interpretation seems tenuous to me. Now moving on, the formation of land on day 3 corresponds well with the geological history of the earth, where plate tectonics and volcanic activity eventually led to the formation of continents. No problem there. Day 3 also features the creation of plant life. And here there are clear problems with the OEC interpretation, namely in the timing of the creation of fruit trees and plants more generally. From the fossil record, we know that fruit trees appear quite recently, well after the appearance of land animals, which are not created until day 6. Even non-fruit-bearing trees did not appear in the fossil record until after insects, which are not created until day 6, and after fish, which are created in day 5. Some OEC advocates argue that the days in Genesis 1 are overlapping, but that obliterates the meaning of the days. Another problem is the existence of plant life in the absence of the sun, which is not created until day 4. So let's go to day 4. Day 4 features the sun and the moon and the stars. Verse 16 states that God made the two great lights and the stars also. This day is quite problematic for the OEC interpretation. It is hard to figure a way in which the plants of day 3 can exist without the sun in a literal interpretation, or even how there were days 1, 2, or 3 at all without the sun or the moon. OEC advocates claim that the sun, the moon, and stars were created in verse 1 as part of the heavens, and this is a plausible interpretation, although as I've explained, I don't think it is the best reading of the text. But even if we read verse 1 as a pre-day 1 creation of the heavens and earth, including the sun, moon, and stars, there would seem to be a contradiction. Verse 16 states that the sun, moon, and stars were made on day 4. Surely they were not made twice. The OEC advocates have two replies. First, the word for made in verse 16 is asa, and they read asa as referring to past action based upon the form of the word. Second, they note that asa is used instead of bara, and that while bara is mainly used to convey an ex nihilo creation by God, asa can alternatively mean to fashion or prepare. Thus, day 4 is about God placing the already created objects in the heavens to serve their purposes. But this leaves me with a question. If the sun, moon, and stars were created in verse 1 and merely set in the heavens on day 4, then where were they in between, during days 1, 2, and 3? OEC advocates would claim that they were in the heavens but not yet appointed for their purposes. Again, I view this as plausible, yet I am not quite satisfied. It seems to me that the OEC position has to twist and contort to achieve concordance with the text. Sea and air creatures are the focus of day 5. This is the first time that animal life is discussed in the Bible. Strictly speaking, the scientific record reveals that marine life, albeit single-celled life, began earlier than day 5. The author could have quite reasonably overlooked things such as unicellular life, about which the Israelites would have been unaware. Rich Deem writes, I would first like to point out that God has not revealed the entire creation process in the Genesis creation account, but only that which is particularly relevant to mankind. Many events in the creation account of the Bible have been intentionally left out, unicellular life forms, dinosaurs, etc., I believe, because they would have been difficult to express in the Hebrew language and would have led to confusion, since they would not have been understood through the vast majority of mankind's existence, i.e. only understandable in the last 2 centuries. But single-celled organisms and dinosaurs are not the only difficulties with the OEC interpretation of day 5. Birds appear in the scientific record after land animals, not before. Likewise, in the fossil record, birds appear after insects and worms from day 6. The OEC account just doesn't seem to fit together to me, and I feel like I have to squeeze and contort the text and use a bit of mental gymnastics in order to get it to match the science. It seems like OEC advocates are using a pretty big shoehorn to fit science into the Bible. Animals and humans dominate day 6, and most of what I could say about day 6, how the order of creation it describes is contradictory to the fossil record, I've already discussed. In the fossil record, land animals and insects appear well before the organisms belonging to earlier days of creation. So in the final analysis, I think that there is just too much out of place with the OEC interpretation of Genesis 1. Too many loose ends, too many questionable interpretive choices. It seems like you need to contort the text and use creative interpretation to get it to match with science. But why should it match with science? I don't think that is a fair expectation to begin with. In future videos, I'll discuss what I think are better ways to view the text. And so that's it for now. If you enjoyed the content, please hit like and consider subscribing. Until next time, God bless.